Hello everyone, we all know why we're here and what we're doing. Instead of doing a long preamble, let's just go ahead and get into it. We're going to be covering Chapter 3 of Gallagher's book today, which covers the Mako 5 Reactor mission. So starting with a new threat. A week passes before they go on the mission for one thing, and Barrett has a birthday. That's kinda nice. We also take this time to have Cloud reminisce about where he came from and how he got here. There's a great quote that starts us off. Bracing his hands on either side of the cracked porcelain sink, he gazed wearily at his reflection in the stained glass, at the traces of past wounds across his toned chest and stomach. He had many scars, each telling its own story from his youth and intense training in the Shinra army. There was one, however, easily distinguishable from the rest. A thin, oval gash, slightly above his gut. It stung to touch, as if the wound had once been deep. His breathing became heavy, for he had no memory of its existence, or how he had acquired it. Another question that needs an answer, he thought, shivering. Is this connected to my amnesia? Well, yeah, kind of. Great bit of foreshadowing there, Gallagher. I like that a lot. So they get onto the train, and first off, Barrett damn near shoots the attendant. I gotta point this out. This isn't really his fault. It's from the game, too. Barrett just picks fights everywhere he goes. Like, are you honestly surprised that you're constantly getting busted when you are constantly threatening people? Barrett has some growth to go through. And there's another moment of reflection here that I like. It's just a sentence, but it's so poignant, especially in that moment. Yeah, this is from Cloud's point of view. He felt the city's anger, its sense of betrayal. And that's the thing, it's just using the city like that as sort of a collective consciousness. I just... Something about that I just like. I can't put my finger on it, I can't, properly explain it, but I just like that. That's a good touch. If you have moments that make me, as the reader, go, ooh, I like that, that's a good thing. as sophomoric as that might sound. Okay, so Barrett's explaining how everything might go to hell, right? So, right on cue, everything goes to hell, because somebody screwed up. I don't know, Barrett. Might have been you. Okay, so they go into the train tunnel, they have to find another way around. There's a great paragraph here, just another great example of Gallagher's imagery here. So they have to go down the air duct, you remember from right before the checkpoint. And the way Gallagher writes this, you can feel the energy. Listen to this. With a deep breath, he let go, feeling his body drop against the frictionless walls of the duct, traveling as they dictated. Dusty air rushed past as he slid, his speed increasing with each second, his vision obscured by the clouds of steam drifting aimlessly throughout the shaft. He turned sharply to the left, the sound of scraping metal ringing out as the Buster Sword tore through the corner. Before him, a square of dark blue came into sight, moving ever closer as he plummeted helplessly towards it. Cloud was vaulted into a narrow corridor, strewn with force against the ground as the shaft came to an end. His head collided hard with the gray stone floor, sending his world into a daze. He gritted his teeth in pain, tossing his sword aside, rolling onto his back. The ceiling seemed to spin, circling above him like a colorless carousel, its chiming melody replaying in his mind, and moaned as a wave of nausea washed over him. A rattling to his right stirred him from his thoughts, and he glanced up to see Tifa fire from the duct, landing on her knees beside him. Gives me the shivers. So they're on the plate now, and they have to find their way back to their pals. And there's a cute little joke here between Barrett and Tifa. We're on level 6. How do you know? Because the sign there says level 7. Womp womp. I like that. And speaking of cartoony, Gallagher stops just short of having a seductive woman tricks the stupid guard trope. This is actually a decently cool scene, showing off Tifa's fist-fighting prowess and setting her up as both a stealthy and badass character. She breaks his fucking jaw with her fist. And there's another interesting talking point here Gallagher has with a paragraph linking Shinra's love of robotics to the lack of work for the people in the slums. It's a relatively realistic modern-day concern, and I like how he used that, and that's a connection that I don't know if they ever formally brought up, but it's a nice comparison, and something I think deserves a bit of credit, so well done there. Okay, so as we approach the core, I love how Gallagher initiates the flashback to Tifa's father being slain. Now, the flashback itself is amazing, but I think the build-up is actually more interesting to dissect. Cloud looked up as they crossed the walkway, the towering walls of the complex climbing to a peak hundreds of feet above, becoming a darkened dome at the height of the reactor. The thick mist of Mako fumes caressed the pathways and balconies on the many floors throughout the structure, their toxic fingers oozing over the graded paths. Short of breath from the searing temperature, Cloud inhaled deeply. As the dense stickiness of the Mako seeped into his lungs, he felt a great dizziness descend upon him, his thoughts becoming a haze. He fought to remain conscious, the importance of his mission thumping in his mind, and in one last effort to open his eyes, all grew quiet, engulfing him in blackness. I said Mako instead of Mako there, I'm sorry. I'm not gonna bother to re-edit that, it's very early morning and I've got a hurricane to prepare for. Sorry. Anyway, Mako. So, Cloud's inhalation of the toxic Mako fumes and the already established idea of Mako poisoning are easy ways to write this off at this stage, but this also does a good job of laying the groundwork for what Mako energy actually is. Processed life stream, really cementing the idea that it's not just coincidence that these flashbacks keep occurring around vast quantities of Mako, but rather that the life stream itself is reminding Cloud of what happened. Now, it might not have been your intent, but it still works. So, naturally, the trap happens, along with the monologuing from President Shinra, who continues the compilation love by commenting that the modern Avalanche is no more than a mere shadow of what their predecessors were. So the chapter ends with Gallagher once again eschewing a robot encounter, despite actually pointing out robots in this chapter, which is kind of odd, and instead actually having the planned explosion knock Cloud off the plate. That's an abrupt way to end it, but it works. Alright, so moving on to the Mercenary. So Chapter 8 of the Mercenary begins with Tifa waking up to an attempted burglary, which was preemptively ceased before her automated turret went off. Another great example of the desolate state of the slums. He then proceeds to put the image of Tifa doing nude stretches in my mind, which isn't the worst way to get my attention. Now, friends, I have to share what remains one of my favorite little bits of character from Williams' story here. He gives a name to the fake ID that Cloud carries, if I may read you a glorious excerpt. After a block, Jessie found Cloud and handed him a card. "Here's your ID," she said. Cloud looked it over. It was remarkably similar to his official Shinra ID from years ago, down to the holographic diamond. Only his face had changed over the years, and his name wasn't Miles Feichschläger? The dendrochronologist. It's someone who counts the rings of trees. Okay, fun aside now. I have an unusual love of this entire Miles Feichschläger character, who does make her appearance later on in the book, by the way, in glorious fashion. So, about 4 years ago, I tried to do a podcast called The Library, where I would interview fanfiction authors. I had a few interviews, did about 4 episodes, and then never touched it again. But my last one was with Mr. Idor Xander Williams about this very book. And I brought this up to him at the time. That's how much I love this scene. And I'm going to now, I'll link to the full interview in the description down below if you care to read it or listen to it. It's very rough. But this is the answer he gave to where that character came from. I feel like I just have to give it the proper homage from the author's lips himself. Miles Feichschläger, the dendrochronologist. What inspired that?
God, Final Fantasy VII is like zero naming convention, so it's impossible to name NPCs. But that's the name of the fake ID that Cloud has. So yeah, the name Miles Feischlager was taken from a guy I knew in high school who was a very funny guy, and his name was Miles, and he was one of the only other people in my school who liked the game. It was not very popular video games when I was in high school, back in the early aughts. And so his name isn't Feischlager, it's a similar Germany type name. But I wanted to give, without the visuals and the cartoonishness and the music, a lot of the comedy, like the joy of Final Fantasy VII, can be lost if you're telling the story because it's so dramatic and dark. And so I tried to put a little bit of my own comedy in there. I think usually just with funny names and banter is another way that I like to have fun with the story and keep it a little lighter and more enjoyable.
Anyways, so, thank you for listening. So, after Barrett being very confused by materia, which I always find funny, but, I get it, that's the world he's building, they board the train, and we cut to another vignette with Johnny. Now, honestly, outside of fanfic specifically dedicated to Tifa, I don't think you'll find a more loving tribute to this minor character anywhere else. He rides off into the sunset here in a short, touching scene for about a chapter. Now, for the sake of fairness, I should point out that William's version also keeps in Barrett being a bully, but this is more about Barrett just kind of seeing a Shinra guy and instigating it. In Gallagher's version, the Shinra guy sort of started the fight, but to be fair, in William's version, Barrett does finish the fight. The Shinra worker tries to stop them from leaving by tackling Barrett, and he gets a few rounds in the gut for his trouble. So, Chapter 9 starts up with Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, and follows their escape from the train. A nice touch here, but this is where we really get down to the difference of the two styles. See, Gallagher leaves you in the dark, which adds to the suspense. Williams chooses to redirect your suspense with Jesse's wristy incident and a little story that happens a bit later with Johnny. And as a result, he tells you a fuller story, if sacrificing a bit of drama in the process. So, again, it's kind of whatever you're in the mood for. With the battle in the tunnel, which is wonderfully chaotic, by the way, we get a nice little tidbit about magic I'm going to share with you here. Tifa kicked, felt her boot connect with one of the monster's hindquarters. She felt a spell being cast behind her. The more she used magic, the more she could sense it. The energy around them was being manipulated. The focal point of this transformation was the materia and the caster. Cloud released the magic of the stone, touching an iron rod and sending bright sparks curling down to the gravel. He continued to funnel lightning into the pole. The bolts flickered in the tunnel. See, there's a few things going on there that I like. Mostly, it's how Tifa is slowly learning about magic through using it. It's a nice sort of almost Jedi training scene moment, but severely condensed. And nothing teaches you how to fight like fighting, right? So the adventure with Johnny continues with him nearly getting his ass busted by Soldier for his phony ID. Now this is another one of those scenes where I'm going to say, read it yourself, because it is a beautiful bit of tension, full of important little hints that I won't dare ruin here. It's one of my favorite scenes in the book, and it really shows the brutality of Shinra, but also the fact that its foot soldiers are just human. Also, I get it, he used sense materia. I'm a clever clogs. Now, Williams does a few things differently here. He has the flashback of Tifa's father occur as a reminiscence chapter as Cloud is sliding down the vent to the plate. This also means that he spends basically no time on the plate at all. In fact, Cloud wakes up and they're basically at the reactor. Most of what would have been the plate section in the previous chapter is actually just used for the build-up in the tunnel. It's not an unwelcome abridgment, to be fair, but it is very different. But I have to take a moment looking at the reminiscence chapter and talk about this amazing bit of foreshadowing. Now, I know in the past 3 episodes, you probably need a counter for the number of times I've mentioned foreshadowing. I don't care. They're both great at it. Here is a quote from Chapter 10, which is, again, first-person view from Cloud's memory. This is specifically the scene, the flashback of Tifa's father being killed. She stalked into the chamber ahead, as if in a trance. I tried to follow. I tried. I couldn't move. I couldn't move. If you don't know the game's story, I will not ruin this for you. If you have played the game to completion and are still confused, let me give you a hint. Why wouldn't he be able to move in his own recollection? This is evocative writing, and it is one hell of a teaser. So, Chapter 11, I honestly don't have much to say here. It's kind of a brief chapter, and it's almost point for point with what Gallagher does, obviously with a few notable exceptions, like not bringing so much in the compilation stuff and what have you. There's also the same preening by Shinra. It's the same resolution. The only main difference is Cloud has a few extra seconds to hang on here. Yeah, those are basically point for point. Not a whole lot to compare there. Both good, but, you know. So, as I say, for a lot of the section, Gallagher and Williams are basically in sync with a lot of the points that they hit. The main differences we're getting here is where they're choosing to have their asides and cutaways, if they have any at all in the case of Gallagher. It really helps determine the flow that they're setting up there, the way they want to tell their story. Again, Gallagher doesn't want to detract. I'm sorry, there's a cat yowling at me. I'm sorry. I'm just going to leave this in. I'm almost done. Gallagher doesn't want to detract too much from the moment. He wants you to be fully immersed in the moment. Williams sacrifices some of that immersion and tone in favor of casting a wider net. You could say that Gallagher is more plot-driven and Williams is more world-driven. But they both had some amazing moments here, as is the usual. So, that's all I have to say, really. Next time we'll be looking at, let's just call a spade, Chapter 4 of Gallagher's book, and the relevant chapters in Williams's book, which will be covering our meeting with Aerith up to Elmira's place. See y'all next time! A rattling to the right. And also there was a cat. The energy around them was being manipulated. The focal point of this transformation was the materia. And them... And you skipped a sentence, Micah. We're doing so good. So, the beats in this segment were, like I say, almost point for point with the other two authors. Between the other two... What other two authors, Micah?